And next we have a guy from Belgrade, awesome guy. His name is SAVA ZIVKOVIC. And SAVA, you're on. Hello.
Hey hello.
How are you doing?
Yeah, doing good. That was like almost perfect pronunciation of my last name.
Really? Did I?
For a non-Slavic person, that was rather impressive. Thank you.
You're welcome. No, but it's all yours, the screen. So you can start.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Hey guys, I'm not sure if I guess my screen share is already on, so we'll be able to see me later, potentially. So yeah, welcome to this process deconstructed talk. I do have to apologize in advance. I am going to be rather speedy about this because time is not on my side. I was kind of ambitious with trying to fit in a lot of the stuff in this talk. So I'm just going to dive right in, and we're going to talk today about the kind of detailed breakdown and the process behind the making of my short film Freight. I'm going to assume, even though I shouldn't, I'm going to assume that people watching this presentation have seen the short film, so I'm not going to be playing it, but all of this stuff is available online on my Vimeo channel, so you can watch that at a later date. So we're just going to jump in. So let me see if this is working. So just a little bit about myself. So my name is SAVA ZIVKOVIC. I'm a director from Belgrade. My background is basically CG generalist, but before that I studied interior design and furniture design. I transitioned into 3D, doing a bunch of PREVIZ and motion design, and then over the years I've kind of combined that and started developing my own kind of short films, and just really kind of got stuck into the kind of creative process behind making short films. And I've done a couple which were kind of mixed between PREVIZ/motion design, but then I've gone a lot further in the CGI aspect of it and created a full-blown full CGI short films like seen here on screen. Most of these were kind of tied to and used as title sequences for a lot of the art festivals over the world. One of the last ones being Playgrounds Berlin in 2019, which seems like ages ago at this point. But early on in my kind of exploration of personal work, I've gotten involved with Access Studios, which is a company based out of UK, where we make all sorts of awesome AAA game cinematics and even like VFX for feature films and TV series. So I work with Access as a director since 2017 at this point. And over the course of time, I've directed a couple of Destiny 2 cinematics, Outriders and Gears of War 5, as well as some of the new stuff coming down the line, which has been in the works in the last couple of years. Hopefully we'll be able to share that soon. But today we're going to be talking about Freight, which is one of my personal short films that I've directed/produced with my small team of friends and collaborators. Yeah, we're going to be taking a deep dive into how we made it. So just going to jump over this slide because this is basically the film. And I'm again, apologies for rushing through this, but hopefully you would have seen it already. And if not, you can always catch it later on. So about the origin of the project. So like ever since we started doing these short films in order of kind of expanding our, I guess, like both artistic and technical kind of tool sets. We've always done them for ourselves as personal like short films. But with Freight, this actually started as a client project where we were contacted by a startup company who's developing a real-time path tracing render engine for Unreal. And the only mandate that they had for us is literally just we had to use their render engine. Everything else was completely open creative brief where we could create anything we wanted. And it was sort of at a perfect time, like this film still to this day kind of represents a perfect amalgamation of kind of years of work that happened before that, and like experience in crafting personal films, but also experience with working with larger studios like Access and kind of diving into that side of like the pipeline and creation process. So it was kind of a perfect opportunity to try and test that with our next kind of actual kind of client project where we had the creative freedom from. So we immediately started writing the story for the project. It's one of those kind of dream projects where you get to do what you want, but also get paid for it, which sounded too good to be true, and it was. Spoiler alert. But basically, when I say we, I mean my two core creative partners, partners. Jesus, I sound like a company already. So Milan Nikolic, who is an amazing concept artist and art director, and Is Femira, or Nebo Shayej, or whichever way you want to call him, who is a composer. And every time we start writing these stories, it's always the three of us. We get together and we start kind of talking about basically our lives and what was kind of current, because like that's something that we always try to infuse as much of kind of our own personal experiences or some sort of metaphors in these packaged up kind of sci-fi work. And this is going to be like, I'm not going to dive too deep into the story side of Freight, because that will be kind of explaining what it actually was about. Is kind of defeating the purpose of the film. You kind of have to experience it for yourself. But just as an example, like with some of our previous work, like IFCC, we were at that time in our lives, like we were stuck in the very kind of mundane, like doing client work and not being very happy with where we were creatively. So we wanted to really like reach out and do something that we've never done before, push for some more cinematic stuff. And we wanted to, like, we made a huge risk basically by not accepting client work and like going out and making this film. And it was a complete unknown for us. It was kind of this search for our own creativity. And that's basically what the story of IFCC was. It was a story about the guy who goes out on a journey to find his inner creativity, which he does at the end. He finds it at the very place where he started off, like alluding to maybe the fact that he's had it all along, but he absolutely had to go on this journey to be able to find it. And it was something that I feel like that was kind of one of the reasons where I feel it resonated with people, because it is, especially within the artist community, because it is a very relatable story that most of us go through. But it was packaged up in this kind of, I hope, unique looking kind of visuals. So with Freight, though, that was a couple of years later. Freight is already 2 years old at this point, but it was some years later than when we made IFCC. We were a bit older, a little bit less optimistic, for example. But and all three of us were going through a lot of like harder times in our lives and dealing with different issues. And that's something that was kind of constantly, as we were talking about the story and the metaphors we wanted to use in this film, that was constantly something that kept popping up, is that this feeling of weight, which really became a synopsis for our story, which was Freight, a story of weight within us. So that once that was set, basically, once you have like an outline and an idea of what the story is, the actual writing bit happens like fairly quickly. And we had that idea within like literally like the first couple of hours of like just chilling together and having some beer. So immediately we went into, because this is like still in the pre-production stage when we were pitching the whole project to this potential client. I was, at that point, I was kind of obsessed with the way you pitch things, especially with my work at Axis. There's so many different ways you can pitch this kind of projects. But being that I'm like a CG artist myself, and I have a small team of friends that we can do a lot of the things ourselves, we really wanted to push this pitch as much as possible and basically like be done with the whole pre-production part of it, which would greenlight the project much sooner, as we hoped. So with the concept art, I'm just going to play some footage there and talk over it. So my buddy Milan, I mean, we've known each other for years. We're kind of lifelong friends at this point, and we know exactly what we want, and we work incredibly well together. There's no point in me kind of trying to direct Milan. Like, Milan knows what he's doing. He's best at his work when he's left alone and he just delivers his stuff. The only input that I would give like from a director's perspective at this stage would be just on basically based on the story level, what kind of a physique we're looking for our main character, just based on what the story requires. But the actual shape forms and the design language, that's something that's completely left up to Milan at this point. And what's amazing about this whole experience with kind of the pitch material that we created is Milan designs in 3D oftentimes. He designs in ZBrush and what's the other one? Slipped my mind, but 3D Code, yeah. That provides us with a lot of unique uses for the stuff that he creates. So he starts off with ZBrush. He creates this kind of, he calls it rough, but it's a fairly advanced concept sculpt, and he creates that within a day or two. And then he takes it on into Photoshop and does the overpaints, does all the material calls, all the kind of the color key moments. Basically what that allows me, because we were basically working in parallel here. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to be showing you today is happening in parallel. So while he's working on the design, I'm at the same time working on the PREVIZ, which we're going to come to later. But with his concept design, he did this with both the characters and the environment assets and everything else. Because it's in 3D, there's a lot more uses of it later down the pipeline, and I'm going to be going through that next. So this is like the 3D base sculpt and then the finished concept art turnaround. So with the PREVIZ, while Milan is doing that, I'm starting to work on the PREVIZ on my end. And just to rough out my process, for this. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the basic outline of the story, and then on the right is me writing down all the shots that I see in my head. So literally, I've been reading the story, and as I'm reading the story, this is before I ever open 3D, I would write down shots as I see them, describing what's happening in the shot as I'm reading the story. And that's my basic blueprint before I even open 3D. So I have a plan in place, and that's my first edit that happens on a piece of paper and in my head before I even start making shots and editing. So the first pass of PREVIZ is literally that. It's literally replicating all the shots that I've called out on that shot list. And it's literally sticking to it 100%, not changing anything, because I just want to get that first pass out. There's going to be room later on for improvements and for adding additional shots in the mix. But for the first pass, it's important to get that out as a first complete pass. Because like straight away in the edit, when you start editing these shots together, you'll see everything that's wrong with it, everything that's wrong with the pacing, everything that's wrong with the shot choices. Literally everything about it you'll see, and you'll know what to do next. So then for the second pass, you go in, you refine the look of it if you want, but you mostly should be focusing on refining the shots and the kind of the editing around the whole thing. As you see, like the PREVIZ is looking super rough. It's just basic like gray boxes and stuff, and some models that I have from previous projects, or like some quick stuff that I had. Because it's not really, you shouldn't really be spending any time and trying to make the PREVIZ look pretty, even though that's, see this change now, this is the second pass of the PREVIZ where I actually did make it look a little pretty, where I've did some lighting and texturing and stuff just to kind of better convey what's happening and get a better sense of the space. But you're going to be redoing all this work later anyway. You're going to be modeling and texturing and making everything look pretty at a later date. What you really should be focusing in the previous stage is just constructing your story and constructing your film in the most efficient manner possible. This is, and I cannot emphasize this enough, this is the most important part of your crafting your short film. This is where your short film is made. This is where you're going to be making all of your creative decisions, even when it comes down to like color, which obviously can change later. But even here, you can see this is very representative of what's happening in the final edit. So this here on the screen, the character change now, this is the third pass of the PREVIZ, and that's like one of the uses of working with a concept artist that knows 3D. He can export like a very rough version of a 3D character that I can use in the PREVIZ, and that's insanely helpful because you're working with the final design. Even though it's not a final asset, you're working with the final design, and it helps with shot composition immensely just to have that. Again, like animation is rough as hell here. Like you can see, this is like just the worst thing ever. But it's the PREVIZ. That's the point of it. This is the sketch part of it. So as long as you've focused on the main part, like you're gonna be like everything that happens down the line is pure production, and all of that stuff is really easy, which is kind of a catch-22 in some way, because like you're spending maybe a week or two creating the PREVIZ, but then you're spending like 5 months making everything look nice, which is kind of, I don't know, it's just a weird kind of timing thing that happens with animation, but that's how it works. So this here is just a quick look at the edit or the edits version and kind of how that evolved. You'll see here that there's a ton of like music and sound layers, and that's like, again, at the very starting stage when you're doing the first edit, the first PREVIZ pass. I think it's super important, and people neglect this oftentimes, is you have to work on the sound edit as well. Even though it's purely temporary, it's completely going to be replaced later on. Much like the visual side of things, you're going to remake everything. You're going to have, hopefully, a sound team that's gonna do this properly. But music and sound is literally like it's more than the visuals and the kind of the film viewing experience. It's 52% of the film viewing experience. And if you're not using it early on for your PREVIZ, for your kind of it's just such an incredible storytelling tool that if you're not using it, you're missing out immensely. So yeah, that's all I'm gonna yabber out on there. Just a quick comparison. This is like some of the, again, top left is the first pass PREVIZ, top right is the second or third pass PREVIZ. Bottom left is the raw MOCAP data that we got from the shoot, and then bottom right is final animation with rendering and compositing. And you can see like it's basically the same thing. Like it's just like polished all the way through the end. But it's the intent behind the shot is exactly the same. And that's what's the most important thing. Like you need to be able to kind of visualize this stuff early on and kind of plan things out, because this, like I could have just left it at this. It's basically the same thing as this. This is just helping a little bit kind of like convey what the idea of this is and the idea of the space. But again, the intention of the shot stays the same. And if you've done your work correct, the rest of it, even though it requires a lot of time to finish, it's super easy to finish, I should say. Well, I mean, easy. Nothing's easy in animation, but it is easier because you know what you're doing. The third kind of important thing, again, with working with concept artists that know 3D, is you can use the same concept sculpt for some early look development. So remember, this is all still pre-production. This is all what I'm showing here is like the first week worth of work of creating Freight. This is like one of the raw renders with Octane that was done with Milan's concept sculpt. And again, it's not the final asset, but the concept sculpt has a lot of detail in it, and it's more than enough to do these keyframe tests and kind of look dev tests of what this could look like. This is the same thing with the Milan kind of painting over and kind of exploring different color schemes. More kind of Octane tests. I'm gonna let you guess which render engine this is, but this is, I was trying out basically the V-Ray, Redshift and Octane at the time just to see which one would give me the best result. This was done with V-Ray. And at the time, Redshift was just like completely blew the two out of the water, specifically for this project's needs, which involved a lot of fog and a lot of kind of art-directed lighting. So it just like in terms of like quality versus speed ratio, it was just a clear-cut choice to use Redshift on that. And I've actually never looked back ever since. So this probably like represents, like this slide probably represents basically the first week's worth of work. We did overwork, but this is probably the most proud section of this project that I am because in the first week, just between Milan and myself, we were able to have a finished character sheet completely with the final character design, a 3D concept sculpt of the character, some look dev renders that showcased what this world could feel and look like. And then we had a finished 3D PREVIZ that had like the temp score and temp sound to it that completely conveyed the story. So that's something that I've never been able to replicate ever since because it was just such a perfect amalgamation of us being invested in the story. And when we presented this to the client, like they loved it, but unfortunately, due to whatever unforeseen circumstances, they couldn't go ahead with the project. And that left us in a very, very kind of peculiar situation because we had a concept and a story that was completely developed and it was ready to go into production, but with no client funding to actually make it. And on top of that, we created a story that really, really spoke to us on a personal level, and it was more than a client project for us. So this is not something that you just abandon and that you just kind of leave up to chance. So we just, in a final act of defiance, because we still owned the IP, we just decided to bite the bullet and self-fund and self-produce the project. So moving on, again, a lot of the things that I'm going to be showing here are happening in parallel. Motion capture actually came after the asset modeling, but that's just how I structured it for whatever reason. So with motion capture, I'm working with this amazing company from Belgrade called DAC-ANT, and I worked with them on pretty much every single short film that I've done, personal short film. And they're just the best group of people, and like the motion capture itself, like, is so liberating in terms of actually working with actors and actually kind of coming up with the look and the feel of the performance in the film. So a little bit of like a prep thing that I think might be interesting to people is when you have the PREVIZ, you know essentially what you're going to be shooting. So what your next steps are to look at the PREVIZ, look at the character's actions and what the character is going to be doing, and then split that up in the action chunks. So for example, because this is motion capture and you can add your 3D cameras later on and make as many shots as you need, it doesn't make sense to shoot it as a film where you're going to be shooting it on a per shot basis. Instead, we're shooting on a per action basis. So if you remember the short film, the first action of the film is a character lays on the ground, he stands up slowly, looks up at the hole from where he dropped, apparently, turns around and looks towards the case and starts walking towards the case. That's a single action, that's a single take of MOCAP, but then later on you can decide however many ways you can kind of shoot that from many different angles, but it just makes sense to capture that action as a single thing. You would be breaking up actions based off of the length and off of the complexity, but basically once you've done that, you would meet up with the actor and you would kind of rehearse all of the actions and all of the performances beforehand, like a couple of days before the shoot, to really get the feel for what you're trying to capture. Just so when it happens on the day, we know exactly what we're doing, we know exactly what we're capturing, and everything runs as smooth as it can. And we have time to actually experiment, and we have some time to actually have fun, because as you've seen, controlling the character live is pretty amazing, to be honest. That is, by the way, or Nebosha, or however you want to call him, that's our composer for the film, but he was also performing our character there and also performing our character in the IFCC. And that was something like when we started IFCC, we didn't really have any access to actors and stuff like that, so we just had to do it ourselves. But something really struck me about is this kind of body language, and it felt really like it felt right for what we needed for the performance. But basically, again, it's similar with like working with actors. It's similar to working with concept artists. I mean, if they're the right fit for the role, if they're cast right, you don't want to be overbearing and over kind of I guess over directing. The only thing you need to provide is some context for what we're doing at the moment, and then like let them be in their playground basically. And I found that some of the best performances that we captured from the whole experience was just when Iz was able to do whatever he wanted. So when that is done, when your MOCAP is done, you get to one of the most fun aspects of it. You get what's called a live solve, which is what you saw on the screen before when he was live performing. The live solve data is like pretty decent, but it's not final animation. There's going to be weird pops and there's going to be like collisions and the fingers aren't tracked. But you get that live solve immediately. Then based off of the live solve, you would get it in the edit, you will work on your cameras, and you would refine the edit. And you would basically mark up the frame ranges, that's the stuff that you see in the bottom left, of individual takes and what selection of frame ranges you're using. And then you would get that back to the MOCAP company, who would then solve the data for clean animation and even do some keyframe animation on top to clean things up a little bit more. But this part of the process is incredibly fun for me, because this is where you actually start to get work with cameras, because you have a semblance of final character performance and you can really compose shots, and you can really focus on composing shots and really focus in on your cinematography. And out of the whole process of creating short films, like this would be one of my favorite hats I get to put on of director of photography, if that was a thing in CG. But I just immensely enjoyed doing that, and working with cameras, working with lighting, and just everything about working with cameras is just so kind of near and dear to me. It's part of my bread and butter of my process. One of the rules that I always use is, like, one of my pet peeves with CG is because you're in this infinite 3D space, you can do anything you want with the cameras, and just because you can do anything you want with the cameras doesn't mean you really should. Like, that's the thing where I feel a lot of CG breaks down, even though it might be beautifully and photorealistically done. I feel you're kind of losing the interest of the audience because the camera is doing such a weird move and such a fast move that you wouldn't get that necessarily in real life. So some of the rules that I impose on myself whenever I work with cameras is trying to treat the camera work as I'm being there with a very small amount of crew and a very limited gear. So we're only using tripods, we're only using just simple tilts and pans, and we're always using just like limited kind of handheld camera moves. And I think by limiting that, you're grounding your animation in a little bit of reality, that it feels a little bit more real. Not necessarily, I was never after like pure photorealism, especially since I can't produce it by myself and need huge companies for that. But just in terms of like feeling like you're there with the character, if you pay attention to these little things, how you approach, it goes really with everything in CG, but I found it really helps with how you kind of perceive the final piece. So jumping a little bit back and forth, assets. So this is just a little bit of a process of how it was made. Another amazing use of, again, having a concept artist that does 3D is Antonio Esparza, who is our character artist on the show. And he modeled, sculpted, and textured the final character. But we were able to use Milan's concept sculpt. So all the gray stuff that you see, that's the concept sculpt. And Antonio was able to retopologize it. And that was, I think, like, that saved so much time, because like that's one of the most painstaking parts about creating characters, is that kind of base topology, and especially when the design is so unique in the kind of the visual language and shape language. It's kind of like it's really hard to get it right. But when your concept designer actually uses 3D, it just makes it so much easier to retopologize that and make it as close to the concept as possible. So after that was done, it's just like sculpting and texturing in Substance Painter. I mean, this is Antonio working his magic on the character, and Antonio is amazing. I mean, he's my Spanish brother. I don't know if he's watching or not. He was there a minute ago, but we've been sort of inseparable ever since, and we've done a lot of cool stuff together that I can't wait to show. A quick shout out to Bunker, which is a local VFX studio that helped us out with the rigging of the character. And then this is a little bit of a process again of my buddy Mihailo Radošević, who helped us out by modeling some of the other assets in the film, like the character's case and the wall machine. Again, similar to Antonio, we still had 3D concepts for this from Milan, which made it super easier to kind of model. A quick shout out to both of them. Both Milan and Mihailo have their Learn Squared courses. So just to plug this in, if you're interested in character design or asset modeling for production, those would be the two that I would recommend. And then lastly, it was down to the environments. And this was left on my plate. I had to make all of the environments for the film. And for a 5-minute film, there's a lot of shots there and there's a lot of environments. And I had to kind of adapt a more kind of modular kit bash sort of approach. So we did the same thing. Again, Milan designed the environment pieces individually, and then he was able to send it to me. I could sculpt them in ZBrush. I could retopologize them, texture them in Substance Painter. And I think I made around like 15 or something environment pieces, individual environment pieces. But all of the shots in the film, all the environments in the film are completely constructed out of those 15 pieces, which made it so much easier and production friendly, because this thing can take quite a bit of time. And if you're the only person who's doing the environments, it can really take a toll on the production. And it also provided us with a lot of creativity with the way we kind of constructed the environments and the way we were able to kind of block them out. A lot of that came from the story, because the story was happening in this kind of ambiguous sci-fi cave. This approach works for that, but I can't really, it's kind of a specific approach to what we were doing. I can't see this working for every bit of film that you have to do. So yeah, these are just a couple of pieces that made up the entire film's environment, basically. With lighting, I'm probably not gonna talk too much about this. I'm already running low on time. But again, with Redshift, my pet peeve is the live viewer. Even though it's amazing render engine, the live viewer is a little bit sluggish at times. But it's still such it's an incredibly stable production tool, and I've never go back ever since. But again, like with lighting, it's a similar approach as with kind of the camera work. I like to ground things and not overlight things and kind of leave it mostly to shadow, because I guess I'm generally drawn more to like darker cinematography. But I think that's one of the more important elements, which brings out the mood in a piece, where in a way it's a limitation because we can't model this crazy looking environment that has all of the detail in. So by hiding a lot of the detail in, it works for production purposes, but also like it kind of serves the story a little bit more, because in a way you're kind of leaving it up to the audience to fill in the gaps and not showing everything. And that's something that I always kind of appreciated about that type of cinematography. I'm just gonna jump over. I'm not sure if there's anything. Oh yeah. So one of the, again, more important things in animation is the color scripts. So this is, again, an amazing use of a concept artist. If you have access to concept artists or art directors when you work on projects. So on the left is like one of my early pass of renders for every shot. And then on the right are those same shots passed through by Milan, where he did overpaints on top and defined the lighting and the look a little bit more. And that's really the fastest way of doing this, because with 3D, when you're the sole person that has to light more than 50 shots, like we did this for basically every shot in the thing, if you have to do this by hand, by yourself, all in 3D, that can take like a lot of time to do. Whereas you do just the first pass, you export them in a board fashion, like to your concept artist or an art director, and he can do it in a 2D fashion, where he can define the lighting and like contextualize everything a little bit more. It's so much faster to work like that, because immediately like you can just try things out in 2D, and then you have, again, a very clear roadmap of what you need to do back in 3D to get the shots to look like the original designs. So again, like, yeah, some of these are like fairly similar, but on some of these, like the lighting is very much accentuated more in what Milan did. And it was again one of the aspects of production that I learned from Axis. Really, like it's not something that honestly I knew beforehand. So it's one of those kind of, you learn a little bit on your personal films, which you apply to your client work, but then you learn a whole lot on your client work, which then you apply on your personal films. There was a point I was going to make here about rendering, which is why it says why we have this image on, but I'm gonna skip that. Briefly about compositing, I do all of my compositing stuff in After Effects. It still works wonders for me and for my personal needs. It's very basic what I do in terms of render passes. It's just like a couple of like cryptomat passes and like a Z-depth pass for compositing stuff in Z-depth. I export a bunch of trackers and a camera from 3D, so I can have everything perfectly tracked in. And then it's just compositing a bunch of stock footage to make the image feel more alive. Specifically, again, the needs of this were it needed to feel a little bit alien. And it's just a lot of color grading and color correction that happens on top of the frame to really bring in the look that I'm after. I leave a lot to comp in this. Like I intentionally light and render out my shots a little bit brighter just so I can preserve the details. And then in comp, I do most of the love to them. So it's kind of the final look is achieved in comp versus being baked in 3D. yeah, you have to do this for every single shot, and it can take a while. But this is like one of the more fun parts of the production for me. Like comp is like usually always fun, but it's fun again. It's fun when you do it for like the first 2 or 3 shots, and then you realize, oh fuck, I have to do it for like 47 more. So it kind of, you know, that's the part of it where I'm like, all right, the CG artist in me still appreciates these things, but really like the most fun, again, going back to the beginning of the talk, is the creative part. Really, like that's where all the filmmaking happens. So that's where kind of where all my current kind of passions lie, I'd say. Briefly again, for the end, we're nearing the end. I'm mindful of the time, but so with the music, again, just to again try to hammer this fact like home, it's really like, especially in purely visually driven films, music is one of your most important tools as storytelling tools, basically. It really is like nothing really, no matter how good images are, when you're talking about the final experience of watching a film, nothing conveys emotion just like music does. And if you're spending all of this time like developing your visuals and developing the look of your film and like doing all the CG stuff, and you're treating music as an afterthought, as being like, oh, this is something that's gonna just come in post, I feel that's you're doing it wrong in that way. We always, whenever we do films, like this is just a segment that we recorded for the making of, but we had these talks all throughout making of Freight. It's not something that we talk at the end. It's something that we start off at the beginning, and we keep talking about like the choices with the music, the choices of the instrument. What does that sound, look, and feel like, or kind of how does it connect to the story, and how does that emphasize a story beat, and all of that stuff is just incredibly important. And it really is, in my experience, like you try to watch any of the short films that I've done, try to watch them without music or with different music, it just doesn't land the same. It's like in this particular example, I'm just gonna give you a little bit of an example of those talks. So it was basically what it came up with was to use 2 different themes for the piece. So there was a theme of the character, and there was a theme of the payload that he's carrying with his case, within his case. And those 2 themes are always, throughout the film, they're always at odds with each other, and they're always trying to silence one another. And you can see like what prevails in the end. But again, like that's all connected with the visual side of things. The theme of the artifact is connected to the color of the artifact. Every time we see red, we hear that theme, and it's like all of that stuff is like specifically designed. And when you see a short film like this, that stuff doesn't happen by accident. It's all meticulously planned for and kind of specifically designed to evoke a certain kind of emotion. And if you do it right, like you can achieve a lot of implied story without like ever uttering a single word, and just kind of relying on your visuals and music, which to me is really like it's at the core of filmmaking. Like it's just you using visuals and images to convey stories, which is I think it's kind of the basic part of filmmaking. Again, a quick shout out to Echoic at the end, an amazing sound design studio from UK that helped us out by crafting all the sound design for the film. So huge thanks, guys. So that's the whole process, and you're finally done. You're ready. You're finished the film. But it's not really done until you've published it and until you've put it out in the world. And that's something, again, a lot of people think of as an afterthought. You just finish a film, you immediately put it out, and you kind of share it a couple of times, or people share it around, but you're kind of missing, again, if you're working on something like this for 5 months, you really want it to, it's like, I guess giving birth. I don't know how that's like, but it's like your child, and you want to, like, you brought it into the world, but now you need to support it and give it some life. So I'm gonna refer you to for the first things first. There's an amazing article. It's an old article at this point. It's like from 2014, but it's an article in the Short of the Week, and it has a lot of the information of how you can go about planning the launch of your short film that I stick to absolutely like religiously at this point. But the preparation for launching something like this can take, I think for Freight, like the preparation for launching took us maybe like 2 weeks or even maybe more. Like it's a lot of work to get everything ready and to get the most out of your launch. A lot of the things that I do is I basically write out everything in advance. Every single social media post, every single kind of blog, email post that I'm going to make, I write out in advance so that when the time comes, everything can go out at once and create this kind of the biggest snowball that it can. This right now is just a big Word document of the entire breakdown on Behance. I always do a big breakdown project launches on Behance as well. And I think by doing this, you can provide two things. Like you can provide the breakdown project, a lot of the images and how we kind of made it, and you can do a breakdown video as well. And then by doing that and by publishing everything at once, people can watch the film. They see immediately links to how the film was made, either in video or Behance form. They go watch that. Everything is interlinked, so you're getting kind of more views. And now that people have seen how it was made, maybe a percentage of them will go back to watch it again with the newfound knowledge of how it was made. So it's just kind of an interesting thing to kind of, to certain people that want to see more. I always find myself, whenever I'm watching something that blows me away, I'm like, oh, I want to see how that's made. And if there's nothing there, I kind of get a little bit, not disappointed, but, you know, like I crave for more information. And this just provides a little bit more value for people who want to follow up on how things were done. And again, can lead to repeated views. And then as a very last thing, I do as a cherry on the top for myself, I make the posters for the film, which I always make available for free. And they're up on the Behance if anybody wants to grab them. But that's like, again, providing additional value for the viewer where they actually can kind of have a little bit of a thing from the film physically if they even want. So yeah, that's the big story of how this thing was made. A little bit of a flex at the end, like this film was my first staff pick on Vimeo. We also partnered up with Dust on YouTube, which is a sci-fi channel and a streaming platform. And on Dust, it did incredibly well. I think at this point it has over 1.5 million views or something like that, which is still insane to me. And this is the first time we've entered film festivals with this film, and most notably, we made the Holy Shorts Film Festival in Los Angeles, which was kind of amazing, to be frank. And now you're done. Now you've done whatever you could to support this thing you worked on and the thing that you poured your life into for the last 5 months, and you can finally kind of exhale and chill. So yeah, this is I had like a bit of a process video at the end, but this is up on Vimeo if you want to watch like a bit of a recap of how everything was made. So that's pretty much it. I know I ran over, but I hope that was informative and fun. And yeah, thank you. You can always, if for the plugs at the end, if you want to get in touch or anything, this is all my social and all my contact information. So you can take a print screen of this and get in touch at any time.
Thank you, Zava. What an amazing presentation. Wow. So inspiring as well.
Thanks.
But I'm never going to start with it. I have to be honest.
I feel so lazy now watching that.
I've got my own project, so. No. Thank you very much. I will see. There are some questions. How long did it take to complete, actually, in a time frame then?
It was 5 months from start to finish. Wow. 5 months, almost to a day, and that was actually like 5 months of full-time work, basically, on it. So that's the. Okay. Let me just see if I can. How can I stop the sharing thing? Yeah,
it stopped already.
Cool. So that was 5 months from start to finish, and that's one of the things that I mean we've been talking about this in like the chat off to the side, but that's one of the because that's the fairly kind of big question that I get at times is like, how do you find time to do this? Because this is, it's a bit of an undertaking, both like time-wise, but also financially-wise, because like a lot of the stuff that are done for free, but also like a lot of the stuff you have to pay for, whether just by your time or actually pay for stuff like motion capture in this case. Mm-hmm. I am in a very, very lucky position where I am, where I work with Access remotely and I work on a freelance basis. and I live in Belgrade, so I can basically take a couple of projects, and then at times when I feel the itch to make something myself, I can take some time off and be able to support myself for taking that time off. And that's obviously a huge luxury that a lot of people don't have. But that's not how I started. Like whenever all the previous personal stuff that we've done, that was done, just in off hours while still working for clients. So you can definitely do that. But nowadays, where I do have this luxury, I most definitely make use of it, because by focusing 100% on it, it just guarantees better results. So yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we've got another question. What would you do differently when you look back at the project? What did you learn on the project? What was most wow?
So that's a good question. So I think it's a weird one. Like when you look back at some of the work, you always have something that you would have done differently. I think creatively, I wouldn't do anything differently. Like that was the story that we wanted to tell, and like we basically told it exactly the way I wanted it. So on that side, I'm like, this is one of the rare projects where I'm actually happy with the results. And even looking back at it now, 2 years ago, I wouldn't change anything. But that's not to say that I wouldn't change anything about the approach, or I wouldn't change anything about the mindset, or I wouldn't change anything about the workflow. So there's a lot of things that I've learned. It's the same as, again, like we've learned about the color scripts, and like obviously, like the more passes you do with the lighting, the more consistent and coherent it's going to look like, and the more polished it's going to look like. But you're always constrained by time there. And it was the same with animation. Like you can get a pretty decent performance just out of using MOCAP, and you can get some additional animation on top to clean that up. But it's really the same thing with animation. Like you do want to get those additional passes in and additional work done on them to make them to really just accentuate specific performances. So that's an approach where I would probably change in the future, is how we kind of tackle specific kind of animation requirements. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the things is learned on this one. I think animation probably being one of the biggest ones, and yeah.
And then we've got one more question by Jan. When did you figure out the ability to clone yourself? And can I rent a machine, please? And he can pay in Ethereum.
When I figured it out, Jan, I'll let you know. Yeah, I mean, it's really all about, like, I think, like we're all, well, not all of us, but I mean, I've been freelance like ever since I can begin, like ever since I've begun working in this industry, and it's a lot of that has to do with kind of building up a team around you and building up like a collective around you of people who are kind of share the same passions about the things that you do. So it's kind of like feeding off of each other's energy. And like that's like, to me, that's like for the longest time, that's been Milan and is for me. And like it's just like every single time we start talking about it, like it's immediate kind of like, oh shit, we have to make something. And that list grows, like that list grows over the years. I mean, Antonio is like one of the like closest collaborators that I have these days. And like it's easier to get excited about things where it's not just you by yourself, where you can kind of like, you're always limited by the amount of stuff that you can do. But when, for example, talking to Antonio, like seeing what he does, he makes a character that he just made for the fuck of it. But then like it kicks the idea in my head, like, oh shit, maybe we can do something like this with the character. And then maybe that kicks another idea in his head. That's basically, I mean, that's also how Freight kind of came about. I mean, Milan did a concept piece that didn't have anything to do with the character in the film, but he did a concept piece a while back that really inspired us to create the story. Like a lot of that, I think that's, like that's the value of working with a team, because it's a lot of the time, like you're like for the people that maybe don't know me or don't know my work, you're sitting there and kind of watching me talk about all of this, thinking that I did all this myself, which is not true. No. You're always, like, you're only as strong as your team, and filmmaking is such a collaborative effort that you have to rely on your teammates to do this. And it's some of the best ideas that we've ever had came from collaboration. It never originated from any one source. So yeah.
And the last one, I think, question: did you render everything on your own, or I presume they mean in-house, or?
Yes, everything was rendered on my own single machine, the same one that I'm sitting on right now, and that's the power of GPU rendering, folks. It's absolutely it's still, you know, like coming from the old days and like V-Ray and CPU and stuff like that. You were always limited by what you can do with, you know, without a farm. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, you have like GPU renderers like Octane or Redshift. They have their limitations, of course, but for specific needs with this one, it was absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, I have this rig is pretty old at this point, but it still works wonders for me. Yep. It's 4 980 Ti graphics cards, and for freight rendering was, I think the average render times were, I think, like 2 minutes per frame or 3 minutes per frame, which is insanely fast for kind of the quality of output that I was able to get there. Yep. And if you look at the entire short film, I think the rendering was maybe like 2 weeks, but that was not like constant, like not like constantly rendering. It was like rendering, setting up new ones, working a little bit in comp. But the process of getting all the shots out was maybe like 2 weeks, which just like still to me that you can do that on your own is pretty mind blowing. And especially now with Unreal, I mean, things get even more bonkers. You get everything for free. So, you know.
Okay, I got a question from a company based in Hamburg.
A company based in Hamburg.
Yeah. How long would you like your beard to grow? A, it's enough. B, to your belly. C, to your knees. D, to your feet.
A. I'm fine with where I am, but man, my wife is on my back. This is gonna have to come off very soon, and it's summer, so you know.
Yeah.
It'll grow back.
Okay, but anyway, Zava, many thanks.
Yes,
from us that you for your time. Very interesting talk. And we have to prep up for the next speaker, I presume.
Exactly. So we got a lot of great feedback in the chat as well. People are very excited about your work. So that's awesome.
Thank you for having me, guys. It's been a pleasure. And,
it's been really cool.
I'll be around in the chat for the end of the day.
Okay,
so,
fine.
Oh, super cool. Thanks.
See you later.
Okay. All right.
See you. Talk to you later.
Bye.